Alright guys, we're going to talk about the Unit 2 Remediation Study Guide. Hopefully you've completed it, so you're just checking your answers. If you get stuck on any of these or you don't understand how I got an answer, please make sure to ask before you go to take your retake. Now, the first thing we need to make sure we know, distance and midpoint, we need to know the formulas. Your distance formula becomes the square root x1 minus x2 squared plus y1 minus y2 squared. Make sure the x's are together and make sure the y's are together. Your midpoint formula, you have x1 plus x2 over 2, comma, y1 plus y2 over 2. Again, midpoint is a point, so your coordinate point should be an answer of x, comma, y, just like we were going to graph it, where distance is a number. If we look at question number 1, the coordinates of A are 2, 1, and the coordinates of B are negative 4, 9. What are the coordinates of the midpoint? Okay, so I know my formula is x1 plus x2 over 2, y1 plus y2 over 2. So if I label my points, I can call this x1, y1, x2, and y2. And if you called them the opposite, that's fine as long as you stay consistent. x1 is grouped with y1, x2 is grouped with y2. Now we're going to plug it in. We have 2 plus negative 4 over 2, and we have 1 plus 9 over 2. From here, you can plug it into Desmos or to your calculator. If you're going to do that, you plug one piece at a time. Do not plug it in with the comma in the parentheses. It will not solve both parts of the parentheses. You have to do it piece by piece. If I solve this, I get down to negative 2 over 2. And 10 over 2. Simplifying it one last time, I get negative 1, comma, 5, which is letter D. Make sure, especially using Desmos, graph your 3 points and make sure negative 1, 5 actually falls between your 2 points. If it doesn't, you know something went wrong with your math. For the second one, if T is, I skipped one, I apologize. The locations of the vertices of quadrilateral LM and P are shown on the grid below. What are the lengths of the diagonals? And I did put the diagonals down here for you, LN and MP. Well, if I start by finding LN, first we need to know what length is. In this case, length is the same thing as distance. So I'm going to call LN x1 and y1, and I'm going to call N x2 and y2. So I'm going to do my distance formula. 0 minus 8 squared plus 0 minus 6 squared. Now, when you do this, you end up with negative 8 squared and negative 6 squared. Please make sure, if you are the type of person who is doing this by hand, when you subtract those numbers in parentheses, make sure to leave your answer in parentheses. Otherwise, you're going to get a negative number, and we cannot take the square root of a negative number. You cannot have a negative distance. If I walk somewhere, it's a positive distance. If I walk back, I'm just adding extra steps to it. It does not become negative. From here, you get 64 plus 36, which is the square root of 100, and I can simplify even that down. My answer is 10. So for ln, the length is 10. For MP, we're going to do the same thing. I'm going to call M my x1, y1, and P x2, y2. If I plug it into my distance formula, 2 minus 6 squared plus 4 minus 2 squared. And again, as long as you stay consistent, your x1s and your y1s can be either point. From here, I have negative 4 squared plus 2 squared, which gives me square root of 16 plus 4, which is the square root of 20. Now, the square root of 20 is a decimal. You can leave it for this listed as the square root of 20. If it asks you for a number instead of the exact square root, you are just going to take the square root of 20. It will tell you where to round to. So in this case, if I round this to the nearest tenth, it would be 4.5. You just have to make sure to read the question carefully, whether they want the exact square root or the rounded square root. Now to question 3. If T is the midpoint of RS and V lies between R and T, which statement must be true? Well, let's draw a picture. if I have my line R and S, and it tells me T is the midpoint, I already know that both of these sides, both RT and TS, are going to be the same. The midpoint lies in the middle, and that means both parts, both sides, are congruent. Now, if I keep reading, it tells me V lies between R and T. It says between. It does not say it's the midpoint. So, I'm going to put it right there. So now we can look at our pieces. We have RV plus VT. So if I do RV and VT, we're adding them together. Is that the same as TS? Well, I know based on the midpoint that both halves are the same. So in this case, letter A is our correct answer. It is true. If I look at the next part, we're talking about ST, so that's half, plus TV. Well, that's that whole big part is equal to RT. If you notice, RT is only half of it. So because we added that extra TV in there, that's not true. Letter C is not true because we don't know for definite that V is the midpoint, and you cannot assume that it is. VS, which is the full length from here to here, is congruent to ST. Well, that can't be because T is between V and S, so they cannot be congruent to each other. Make sure you're working logically through these and solving them out. What is the length in units of the line segment with endpoints 1, 4, and 3, 7? Again, length is the same thing as distance, so I'm going to label this x1, y1, x2, and y2. From here, if I plug it in, we have 1 minus 3 squared plus 4 minus 7 squared. Again, as you subtract, make sure you keep those numbers in parentheses. If you type -2 squared into the calculator and you don't have the parentheses, it will give you an answer of -4, but distance cannot be negative. From here, you get 4 plus 9, which gives me the square root of 13. Now, if you followed the trick in Desmos to find the distance and typed in your points as A and B and did distance AB, you're going to get 3.60555, and it's going to keep going. Obviously, that's not an answer up there. So then what you're going to do, type all your square roots into Desmos right underneath that. Find the square root that matches. Point M is the midpoint of line segment BC. Okay. So if I have line segment BC, M is the midpoint, that already tells me that these sides are going to be the same because the midpoint's the middle, making two congruent sides. If the coordinates of M are -1, 1, and the coordinates of B are 3, 4, find the coordinate of point C. So I'm going to label my drawing. M is at -1, 1. B is at 3, 4. Well, we know midpoint means they're the same. So I need to figure out how did I get from 3 to -1. In this case, I subtracted 4. I'm also going to look, how did I get from 4 to 1? Well, I subtracted 3. Because midpoint means they're the same, that means you have to do the same thing on both sides. If they're congruent, they are exactly the same. So to get point C, I'm going to subtract 4 of my x, and I'm going to subtract 3 on my y. Well, -1 minus 4 gives me -5, and 1 minus 3 gives me -2. So C is located at -5, -2. And you can do the midpoint formula with B and C to make sure it's correct if you really don't trust yourself. 3 plus -5 over 2. 4 plus -2 over 2. Well, 3 plus -5 is -2 over 2. 4 plus -2 is 2 over 2. From here, I end up with -1, 1. This matches the midpoint that was given to us in the problem. So now we know that we're correct. If it didn't match the midpoint that was given to us in the problem, you would no longer be correct. Now, on to constructions. Keep in mind with constructions, you have to use what's given to you in the diagram. You can't cross points unless there's an X created using the compass. So if I look, and I apologize that they're on two different slides, we have a construction, and I want to know which best represents the markings that could lead to a line parallel to PQ through point R. If I look at letter A, I do have an X that I was looking for, but if I connect P or Q, because those are the only other points given, through that, neither of those lines are going to be parallel. So A does not work. If I look at letter B, I do have an X out here, and if I connect R through that, that looks pretty parallel. If we look at answer choice C, I do have my X out here, but if I connect R to that, if I were to keep going, those two lines would eventually meet. Parallel means that they are never going to meet and never going to touch. Answer choice D, we don't even have R going through the line. If it's going to be parallel, you have to connect the lines to make sure that you're measuring the distance correctly. So because these two don't have a line connecting them to be able to measure, letter D is not correct, meaning letter B is our best answer to construct that parallel line. Now, in this case, I want to know what's being constructed. And if you look at the screen, you can look and tell that they're parallel lines. So already, using good test-taking strategies, I'm going to get rid of A and I'm going to get rid of C because that symbol in the middle means they're congruent, not parallel. Now I need to know which lines are parallel. Well, the top line is the points A and F, and the bottom line is the point B and E. So, letter D is correct. B says AB is parallel to BE. Well, AB goes this way, and BE goes that way. If they intersect each other, they cannot be parallel to each other. Which statement describes the construction being illustrated on the rectangle? Now, this is where vocab is super important. If I look at A, it says a bisector of AB. Well, we know a bisector cuts something in half. If I draw a line from my X straight down, that does not cut AB in half. Letter B says a line segment congruent to AB. Well, if I connect from that line to G, we don't know how long it's going to be. If it stops at letter G, it is no longer congruent, so B does not work. So between C and D, we know it's a perpendicular line through A and B, but now we need to decide, is it through point G or through point E? If I look at the line I drew, yes, point E is on line AB, but the line does not go through point E. So you have to use a little logic and go, even though you know point E is on the line, this perpendicular line is going through point G that is not on the line. Please make sure if you have any questions on these questions or the ones you got wrong on your test, you ask before you take the retake, because once you start the retake, I cannot help you anymore.